And then it actually runs it. And the editor is actually going to be like, run something like, yeah, exactly. But yeah, if you have rooms on like that area.
How you doing? Yep, all set up. Yep, thanks. Should be at least. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, but it's
what happened there? Was that on a second ago, or has that been blue the whole time? Huh. So this just come. Cables come unplugged sometimes. Okay.
Clearly.
Sorry, you're welcome.
All right, guess I'm gonna get started. So my name's Tim Beck. I'm a software web developer, etc. and work out of Agawam, Mass. Work from home, but that's where my company is. And I'm gonna be talking about the mean stack today, as well as just kind of full stack JavaScript in general. And this is a very, very broad topic. So it's gonna be a pretty high level overview. I'm just gonna kind of pretty much try to convince you of why you should investigate it more. And if we want to talk more after one-on-one or whatever, I can certainly show you more that the time slot doesn't allow, but I'm not going to go too in depth on any one thing. So there are certainly a lot of technologies involved. So what is the mean stack at its basic level? And I chose this diagram because it actually shows functionality, so you have to read from the bottom counterclockwise. But mean stands for MongoDB, Express.js, AngularJS, and Node.js. And in basic, it is a full stack JavaScript web application solution. So you could compare, and it's all open source. You could compare it to LAMP, for example. And when talking about full stack JavaScript, it's kind of, I'd say it's fairly in fashion right now. It's something that a lot of people are advocating for. And there's a lot of benefits to it. One of them is having the same skill base across all your developers. You can have someone who knows JavaScript and they can easily transition from working on the front end to the back end. It's really more about, learning individual libraries and kind of general approaches on the back end or front end that are successful. In some cases, you can end up with isomorphic code, meaning you have functionality that's shared on both the client and server, so literally calling the same function. You don't have to duplicate any code. Mean.js doesn't really do that too much by default, but if we have time, I can show you. I've done a little bit of additions to it to kind of support that. One other nice thing is because it's all running in Node, it's cross-platform, so you don't compare it to, again, LAMP. Doesn't matter if you're on Linux or not. And another nice benefit is automated testing is quite easy. Again, it's all JavaScript, and there are many good options for automated testing in JavaScript, some of which I'll show briefly. So some of this I've already touched on. Mean stack is made of open source technologies. It's increasing in popularity at a pretty fast rate. There's, you can look at different Stack Overflow questions or whatever, and it's got pretty convincing numbers. There are many frameworks, boilerplates, generators that all have different levels of sort of opinionation on how things should be done. And that's, I kind of say that's probably one of the biggest disadvantages of mean stack in general, is it is kind of fragmented. I'll mention 3 good options, but there's like dozens out there that are probably good. They just have, small communities. So again, it becomes kind of a thing of picking between alternatives based on communities, how you like the APIs, just looking through the commit history, how active in development it is, things like that. But in general, the communities are very active because this is all pretty new stuff. So from the client perspective, some key elements of the Mean stack are that it uses a single page app architecture. So you're not loading a whole new page every time you navigate to a new view on the client. As such, it's based on components and not pages. Has an emphasis on client-side rendering. It uses MVC, Angular, which is, the A in Mean, is MVC by definition. It's an MVC framework. And one of the nice things on the client is that it works well with mobile kind of by default. In the case of Mean.js, it has Bootstrap, which kind of handles responsive design in most cases kind of for you. And some other stacks probably don't have Bootstrap, but again, responsive design is something that the web does pretty well by now. It's a lot of work has been done in that area. On the web server itself, you don't have to deal with hosting or setting up or deploying a standalone web server like Apache. You just have it built in with all your other Node code. And for those of you who, well, first of all, how many people have used Node at all? Okay, so that's good. So you guys probably know this, but some of the things that are nice about Node are from a performance perspective, because it's event-driven, can handle a lot of small concurrent jobs and service calls, etc., and not bog it down. So that's kind of a general pattern that you follow in all this, but you guys are probably mostly used to that. Another key difference is in the database end. Because we're using MongoDB, that is a NoSQL database, which means it's a document database, not a relational database. It is much more flexible, much less structured. You can, to kind of simplify, you can have different rows in the same table that have independently defined columns. You can have a column on 10 rows that doesn't exist on any of the other 100 rows kind of thing. Another nice thing is because this is all JavaScript and MongoDB outputs JSON, you don't really have to worry about transforming your data. There's no serialization that you really have to worry about. It's just always JSON. You don't need a separate query language, although I will show there's some libraries that help with querying, but it's not like, the difference between JavaScript and SQL is much more different than the difference between vanilla JavaScript and Mongoose.js, for example. And kind of because of that, it's really simple to make basic REST web services. Again, all JSON the whole way through. So at this point, it's kind of, the question becomes, so we've decided we want to do something with Mean as a general stack. How do we go from there? We could roll our own. We can get those really 3 libraries. I mean, Node is just the platform. We could get Angular, MongoDB, and Express and just kind of start from there. We could also use an opinionated framework, something more like Mean.io, which I'll mention briefly. Or we could have a boilerplate, which has a little bit less, it makes fewer decisions for you, It's more open to interpretation. You can customize it how you want. And I kind of like that approach. I've just dealt in the past with kind of more rigid frameworks where you feel like you're kind of fighting against the intention of the developer to do what you want to do. I don't think that's really a place you want to end up in. So in any case, with a boilerplate, some of the nice things you get consistent patterns from the start that you can follow. These patterns follow best practices, assuming you're using a good boilerplate. You have community support, documentation, and code samples. You get a lot of stuff for free, which I'll show off in a demo a couple slides from now. Fewer bugs, and like I said, I think the boilerplate is a nice balance of opinion and lack of opinion. So this, specifically today, I'm going to be talking about the Mean.js boilerplate, and unfortunately, this is kind of a weird time to be talking about it because they just put out version 0.4, and the Yeoman generators, which I was going to demo, haven't caught up yet. So part of what I described in the abstract for this with the generators doesn't really apply. I'll still show the method because it'll get up to date hopefully soon. It's in active development, but not everything is in sync right now. So not the best timing. And Mean.js was originally forked from Mean.io, which I mentioned. Mean.io is more of an opinionated framework. If you go to Mean.io, you'll see that they're very upfront about that. They literally say that opinionated full stack JavaScript framework as opposed to Mean.js, which describes itself as a application boilerplate, which means you should start changing everything. So like I said, more open to interpretation. Another alternative that's really popular is Angular full stack. That one seems to have gained a lot of usage recently. Very much worth looking into. I'm probably going to look into it myself. It could be a better option in the long run. All of these are in active development, but Angular full stack is in like hyper active development, which could be viewed as a bad thing. So this, that done, I'm going to show off the standard boilerplate site that you get, and I'll show how to make this in a minute. But this is everything that comes with you out of the box. So this is running locally, and let me make sure it's all running. Yeah. Oops, it's not. So just start that back up. Right. So this is the home page. It just has, basic description. Nothing exciting here. This is an Angular view. And so some of the things you get for free, obviously routing, MVC, general Angular stuff, but you can use OAuth to sign in, or more standard, create an user entry in the database kind of thing. So I'll choose Facebook. And so now, yeah.
So does this out of the box generate some boilerplate?
Yeah, so this is what you see here is completely unmodified. So it uses a library called Passport to handle authentication, which I'll touch on a little bit. But basically, you end up with I think it's actually in users. You end up with these providers. It's not worth the time to go too in depth, but you end up with these providers, one for each of the OAuth providers, and then one for your own database-driven authentication. And so, all I had to do, the only change I've made to the entire project since building it was just add in these Facebook secret and ID. So, you have to go into Facebook and make an app and get that info from them. And I had already done that. So because I have that, we're able to actually use Facebook to log in. And so you can see my, my picture from Facebook. One other nice thing this does, which if anyone's worked with OAuth, it can be kind of easy to like set up multiple accounts for yourself. If you log in with Facebook once and then Twitter the second time, it doesn't really know unless you have a explicit coded way to manage that they're different, or that you're the same person. So another nice feature built into Mean.js is this kind of management screen where you can sync up different OAuth logins for yourself. So that's a really nice feature. That's something that like people complain about a lot, and they've already handled it for you. I was pretty impressed with that one. Just some basic user functionality, and then there is a built-in sample CRUD module. So this is an articles list. You can create an article. And right now, this is all running on a local MongoDB instance, which I'll show as well. So you can make these, edit them, delete them, view the list, etc. And one other thing that's built into this is Socket.io for real-time communication. So by default, we have this chat. So you can see there's two of me in the chat, two different browser instances. And you can see in real time, messages proliferate between the two. So again, you get like a lot of pretty advanced functionality out of the box. And you can, obviously change it yourself, and I'm sure you need to enhance these things, but it's a really good starting point for a lot of that stuff. I think that's most of it for most of the features that are built in kind of thing. Oh yeah, and it's Bootstrap. That's another. So like I mentioned, this comes with Bootstrap, which gives you responsiveness by default. So you can change the size and everything. Flows nicely and responsively. Super. Oh wow, yeah. And so you'll notice, for example, this menu is now a drop down with the subheadings here. And when you go back to full screen, because of the screen size, it responds and puts it back in a, split out menu style. So again, a lot of things for free. We covered Bootstrap. And another obvious thing you'd want to customize is the look and feel. You'd want at least a Bootstrap template because dozens of sites look like this, just kind of default Bootstrap look. Passport, covered that. And Socket.io works not just with text, also with video, audio, etc. So that's all supported, built in. And so, we talk about Mean, we think of the obvious 3 libraries that are kind of the core, but and I've mentioned Bootstrap, Passport, and Socket.io, but there's some other things that are really key here that I just want to mention so they kind of at least get in your head a little bit and to look into them more because they're really important aspects of this whole thing. So on the database end, I briefly mentioned Mongoose. Mongoose is a JavaScript library that is an object document mapper. I guess I wrote model. I don't know if the terms are interchangeable, but it's the same thing as an ORM, but for a document database. It adds some level of structure to MongoDB, so you can have validation constraints. You don't need them. You can leave them out. It's up to you. Built-in CRUD operations, typecasting if you need it, query building, all that. It's really powerful. Just makes Mongo a little nicer to work with, and that's I think pretty damn popular, pretty accepted in the community. I think there's some more alternatives gaining popularity now, but haven't looked into those yet. Then for testing tools, we have Karma, which is a test runner. And then either Mocha or Jasmine. Mean.js uses Mocha, but those are testing frameworks. I think they're both, I forget the term, like self-defining functionality tests, behavior-driven testing, that kind of stuff. So that's all really powerful. And again, that's included by default, built in. I'll try to run those later if we have time. And then finally, there's some scaffolding and build-related tools that are built in. So Yeoman is used for generating. Do you have a question? No? Okay, sorry. Yeoman is used for generating code. It's used to generate the whole project. And you can see here, and again, this is the part that doesn't work right now. And at least they are good enough to note that. But once that gets ported, you then have generators for all kinds of stuff to just make, CRUD module, that's like that, those articles pages. Angular modules, routes, controllers. You can basically, any component of the app, there's a generator for it to save you the time of creating all the files with the appropriate names. So that's handy. And Yeoman itself uses Bower, and I guess all of you, or most of you, are familiar with NPM. Bower is essentially the same thing on the client. It's just a client-side web package manager. And then either Grunt or Gulp as task runners, which handle builds, linting, compiling CoffeeScript or Last or SAS or whatever to the native languages, things like that. So kind of understanding all that and all those different components, I'll go over the process for creating a new one of these apps. So I'll open the command window. So the general process is for using the generator, and again, this won't fully work, but I'll show you, is yo is the command to do any kind of generator, and then we've already downloaded it. It's Mean.js. And that's just going to run. Oh yeah, and so before we get too far into that, the prerequisites to have before you can successfully run this, you need Node.js installed and MongoDB installed. Those are pretty obvious. If you're going to use Bower, which you are, you need Git installed. And then for the full generation routine, you need these NPM packages. You need Yo, Grunt, or Gulp, and Bower. And then if you're doing testing, you need Phantom.js, which is, if you haven't heard of that, it's like a headless web browser. So it's essentially a JavaScript engine without a UI. So it can run your website for real, but without showing it to you. So this is the generator method. I suppose I skipped the step of actually installing the generator, just generator Mean.js. So I've done the Yo Mean.js step. So this is kind of, this is basic Yeoman stuff. It pops up the little butler-y guy or whatever the hell. That's their thing. You can choose your name for the app, descriptions, keywords, company name, whether to include the CRUD sample or not, different Angular services to include, and that's it. And so when this finishes, we'll see in the C drive. I'm not going to go through the whole thing just because it will take some time to install the dependencies. But you see now we have, it's still being set up, but this is, you know, the basis of a Mean.js application that it's generating for us. So after that, after it finishes its thing, it's best to run npm install and Bower install to make sure everything gets, all the dependencies get included. And then what I've found is that you sometimes hit errors where it'll say, you know, the one I've seen a lot is with Node Sass, so the compiler for Sass style sheets. It'll give some error about couldn't find it, or it couldn't start, or incorrect versions or whatever. And so you may have to manually install some Node packages. And that's kind of annoying. It's probably just a specific version issue in their package.json that maybe I'll try to like fix that tonight or something and commit it. Like I said, this method isn't working at the moment. The other option, which is working, so that's what I'll actually go with, is to just go onto here, onto the GitHub page, and you know, whether you get it through Git, get it through Git, or just download the zip. You know, this is the same folder or the same structure that would have been created by the generator, except the only difference is this, you know, doesn't have, it includes everything by default. It includes the CRUD modules and all that, and you can't specify your name in advance, but you get the full folder structure. You still have to do an npm install, Bower install, and then might run into a couple specific issues. And if you try to do this at home and have issues, you can certainly email me. I can try to help you get through them, but mostly it's just, you know, read the error message and do the obvious thing. I have faith in all of you. So I've done that previously and have the full, well, I'll just show it in WebStorm. So I have the full setup here. This is where I, you know, it showed the only thing I changed was this Facebook info. Everything else here is default setup. And so this is what's running over here. This is, you know, it's on localhost, it's running now. So once you have it set up, it's very quick to actually run it. You have to have your MongoDB running. So I have one command window here. You can do it as a service or whatever. I guess you're all Mac people, so I assume there's some easy way for you to do it, but I just know the hard Windows ways. You run your MongoDB, and then all you do is literally type, you know, I already kind of did it on here, but you can just type gulp or grunt. I prefer gulp. I did a session on it here last year, and that you can see the tasks it does. It sets the dev environment, does the linting, does the compiling of Sass, less, more linting, JS hint, and then it sets up some watchers. So if you, you know, some of the nice integration you get out of the box, for example, if you change one of your node scripts, it automatically restarts your web server. If you change a client script, it automatically refreshes your browser. Stuff like that. That just kind of makes the process a little bit easier. And you can do, you just have to add prod. It's probably very small text, but just add prod, and that uses a different gulp task, which runs it in production mode. Running the tests, this might work. Try it. Running the tests is kind of a similar sort of thing. Just gulp test. We'll see if it works. I don't remember if I have Phantom.js installed. Either way, if it's running, it's not the most important thing. Yeah, I don't have Phantom installed. Sorry. You can also do specifically tests for the client or server, not all of them. So that's sort of the real basics. One other thing that you can do, and after that I'm just going to kind of go into the code and just see kind of how far we can get. But it's really easy to use like a free sandbox MongoDB instance on the web, host it out in the cloud, kind of database as a service type stuff. And that's really handy, so you can have the same data across machines when you're testing. It's just good to have in development. So I like MongoLab. Performs well, good uptime, solid free plan. So super quick, I'll show that part off. Because I really think that there's the basic setup, but then to really get set up, I think it's best to connect to a database like this and have all at least one or two OAuth providers set up, which I sort of showed how to do. So you log in, blah blah blah. That part should be quick. Okay, so on MongoLab you can choose different hosting platforms. I just use AWS. Doesn't matter too much. And I'll pick the sandbox, which is free, 0.5 gigabyte. 2.6 is fine. And we'll call it demo. Okay, so now we have our demo database. So to actually connect to it, we need to make what's called a database user. So I'll just make one here. And the warning message is pretty clear about that. Nerd and Summit is the password. So this password isn't the most secret thing in the world. So now all we do gives us this handy URL. Go back into WebStorm. And I'll describe the configs in a second. But super quick, we have our database config and the URL for the database. So just replace that one. That was the local one with this. Nerd Summit. That's not my real password. But okay, so that's all set, and now I will just rerun it, and as we'll see, just that easy. We are now running against, and so I'm sure the quickest way we'll be able to tell that we're running against a different database is go to the articles list. There's no articles. Remember, I had created one. So just go through this all really quick. MongoLab test. Create it. Ooh. Whoa. Let me try logging it. This should work. If it doesn't, not the end of the world. Articles, create articles. Test. Yeah, so I guess I should have to relog in because I reran the site or something. Or I guess there was something in the database for me as a user that was missing. So now we have that saved in this database. And then now, just to kind of prove that, we can look on here on MongoLab. Here's our collection of articles. And then you can see as the correct title. So again, it's just a really easy way to have an actual deploy or database running not on your machine that you can use and test and all that stuff. So that's all the basics. So I'm gonna start kind of going through the code a little bit. Do we have any questions before I? Yeah.
Does it handle mailers, or is there any functionality to handle mailers?
Yeah. So I haven't used it, but built in, that's included in here. In the probably.
You don't have to like,
No, yeah. I mean, what?
you choose like an email provider, like Mailgun or Sender, something like that.
So all I know is that it has Node Mailer as a dependency, and I've seen people use that. So I mean, I can't tell you the details, but that is what it has built in.
The other question I had was, is there like a Heroku equivalent to hosting the site? Something that you can just like push up in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much anything. I think Heroku. I think you can use Heroku. I use Azure. I'm Windows guy. I use Azure, and that's very simple. The one gotcha there is you need to update your deployment script to run gulp or grunt. It doesn't do that by default. By default, the way I have it set up is I commit to my Git, and then it immediately pushes that over, does npm install, bower install, all that's out of the box. And then, like I said, the only thing you need to add is the task runner, either gulp or grunt. And with that, you can easily set your configs for like your database connection strings, your Facebook secrets and IDs, all that stuff. So I think really any cloud hosting, platform as a service kind of thing, or infrastructure, whichever one, I always forget. Any of those work pretty well and should have a kind of low stress workflow where you just click a button, or it's even done automatically.
Cool.
Any other? Yep. Oh yeah, so that's a good point. I feel like I skipped a slide or I deleted a slide. Let me look for that because I did. It's not important. I did have a slide about other options, and that's where it was supposed to talk about Mean.io and Angular full stack. In addition to that, like I said, there's dozens of other Mean things. The other option, if you like full stack but don't like the Mean stack, is something like Meteor, which I haven't used personally, but there's a ton of options. That's kind of fits in with the general story of fragmentation. That's not just a problem within Mean, it's also a problem within full stack JavaScript. Yeah, because there's Meteor. There's a bunch of other ones. There's there's spreadsheets and lists on the internet comparing all of them, and I feel like you could never try all of them, but it seems like Meteor is the most reputed. And just so you guys can kind of understand, this is the Yeoman website. These are all the generators they have. And if you look here, I kind of don't understand what happened because there's a Pluralsight course that came out like 3 months ago about Mean.js, which is where I started working with it. And in the video, and like I said, 3 months ago, in the video, Mean.js had like 250 stars and Angular full stack wasn't on there. And now Mean.js has 313 and Angular full stack has almost 4,000. So I can't explain that. And that's kind of why I think it's a good idea to maybe look into that too, even though I'm standing here advocating Mean.js. But I think they're both good options, probably. Other questions? Okay, so this is the, and I'm just gonna make a little more room. Probably zoom in a little bit. Not used to the Zoom thing. Is that good? You guys read that? Okay, so, as I've been saying the whole time, there's kind of a lot here. It seems almost silly to try to explain all of it now. All this stuff at the root level, most of it is kind of build and deploy type stuff. You have your Bower JSON, your package JSON. And super quick in package JSON, you see all these fields. This is what the generator would be setting: name, keywords, descriptions, all that stuff. You have your Bower JSON. You have git ignore. all these typical JS hint RC, all this typical type setup stuff you get out of the box, even if you don't need it. But it's good to have it and have it be set up. You have your grunt file, your gulp file. And if you look in here, you know, like I said, the typical stuff: building, linting, running tests, setting environments, node mon, and live reload for refreshing things automatically when you make changes. All that stuff's in a pretty good place right now, but you can obviously add to it, as I've done in my project. Test configs. The only, I guess this is sort of a real file. The current setup they have, the server.js file does like essentially nothing. This is, you know, sort of the main function of the whole application, but it just kind of calls into other things. Then from here, scripts is just very specific security related stuff. Public is your client-side JavaScript libraries, metadata type stuff, and I think that's where your built files go. Node modules, most of us know. Build. I think this is new. I don't think I've ever seen this. Lumix, I don't know. And by the way, does anyone use WebStorm? I definitely would recommend it. It's like $50 for a year license, and it's got pretty full feature support.
Pretty nice and generous open source policies.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's a good product. Some quirks, but overall I like it. Definitely, it's a good equivalent to like Visual Studio, but again, seems like maybe 2 of you even have probably used that. I don't know how it compares to all your weird Mac stuff. It's just not my purview, but that's okay. So under config, this is one of the most important parts, and this is where you start to see the differences between environments. So we have basically 2 types of configs here. We have assets, which are just file paths and match patterns. So this is, you know, grouped. This is what gulp uses for bundling type stuff. So you have, you know, your third-party CSS and JavaScript. You have your CSS, JavaScript, less Sass, and just other server-related stuff. Pretty simple. Based on the flag set within gulp, it'll choose, you know, which of these lists to render, depending on if you're in production, development, test, whatever. And I guess, you know, one thing that's maybe kind of obvious here is that this is pretty broadly targeted, like the fact that it supports both grunt and gulp, and the fact that it has, you know, by default, it has, where are they? I don't remember where they are. It has, I think, 5 OAuth providers, which is like kind of a lot. I'm not going to worry about it too much. I forget where it lives. But, you know, it has Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, PayPal, and 1 other for OpenAuth providers. And like, seems unlikely you would need all of them. You know, the Cloud Foundry environments, that seems very specific. So like, definitely it seems like a kind of implied step in the setup phase is delete all the crap you're not going to use. But I think that's kind of a tolerable thing to have to deal with. And then same general pattern with these environment configs. That's where we set the database string, all these. Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn, GitHub, PayPal. So there's actually 6. That's where you set up the metadata for those. Oh yeah, here's some more. I don't know if this means anything to you. Here's some more mailer stuff. I don't know if that helps. Sets live reload to true. All that. And, you know, compared to production where it's a little more restrictive, doesn't use live reload. That's all pretty, makes, I'd say, good sense. This general config file, which kind of pulls everything together. Not going to get into the details, but it kind of handles all the stuff I've just been talking about in concert with gulp. So this config lib app, I think, yeah, so this is what really becomes the main function. This is what gets called from server.js. So just to look through this super quick. Looks like it can seed your default DB if you're in development mode. I haven't used that. Sets up your Mongoose models, connects to MongoDB. Start listening on the port, basically start the web server. And do some logs. And then it starts calling into these other configs. This is the kind of stuff that I'm not going to go into great detail on, but this is where it sets up Express. At a super high level, Express is a web application server in Node that basically handles, the main thing it does is handles routes using what's called middleware. So if we look through this, you'll see there's like, it registers like probably like 50. It registers all these middlewares. And basically what a middleware is if you think of a request as a pipeline of, hitting the server and going through a number of stages of, authentication, authorization, deserialization, cookie parsing, all this different stuff. A middleware will handle one of those things. So this is essentially defining a pipeline to handle requests, some of which might be serving up HTML pages, static JavaScript assets, could be API calls, any of that. This is just the basic Mongoose setup. So you get the idea. These are all just kind of configs for third-party components that all get included. And it seems like this would be. Sorry, I'm like pretty bothered that I can't find those passport providers, but whatever. And so then, how am I doing on time here? So beyond that, the only thing that's really left is, well, like all the code. Like pretty much, the only thing that's left is pretty much everything. So the general approach they use in 0.4, and this was one of the big migration points from .3.x, is that now they're using a vertical folder structure. So before, under this, I think there was a modules thing, and then it would be client and then server are the folders, and then under that would be articles. Whereas now we have a given feature and then the client server and tests for it. So I'm gonna go pretty quick here and just super high level. I don't know. Yeah, so I guess to take a step back here, there's so many kind of the way I kind of advertise this presentation and the abstract is that there's so much here, but having this kind of boilerplate helps you learn it because you can see everything in action. You can run this, you can set breakpoints at any point in the process, which is another nice thing about being full stack JavaScript. Everything's can be debugged from the same place without any crazy effort. So, a lot of this you're gonna probably figure out yourself, or maybe, read more detailed tutorials, but all of this stuff you can debug easily, and in doing so, you can learn the, whatever, I probably listed like 10 different libraries and tools, Mongo, Express, Angular, Passport, Bootstrap, etc. All those are very valuable things independently, and you can learn all of them by just kind of exploring this. So I think I'm probably gonna mostly leave it at that. I'm not gonna go into too many of these things, but like, for example, you can see here's your Express server-side routes, which you define the base of the route. Here's where it does the authorization, and then you register the actual handlers. So if it's a GET request, you use these controller methods. Post, use this one. And that's where in here you define that. And these make actual database calls where necessary. This is an example of a Mongoose call. Mongoose just adds the save. It's a model. Here's the models where it defines. You can see, like, for example, I mentioned that there's no, MongoDB is like extremely free form, no validation. Here's where you can see that we're actually adding types to our fields. Well, we're defining fields first of all, which is already a level of structure that you don't get by default. Defining the types, default values, whether to trim a string, whether it's required, and an error message. So you can kind of see where you build in more structure into your database using Mongoose. This is your authorization. So it's kind of registering URLs and permissions based on a role. So it's role-based authorization. Again, pretty simple for you to set up. It's kind of easy to forget to do this, and then you might end up with authorization errors, but then it's pretty, again, simple to come in and add this, if you're missing a URL or if you're missing a HTTP action, whatever. You can add that in, get up to speed there. That's really the basics on the server. On the client, we have config. This is what populates that menu at the top, which is, I suppose, another thing you get for free realistically is this menu with the drop down and all that. So that gets configured here. Here we have our client routes, which link a URL to a template. It's using the Angular state provider library. Again, not the most important thing. Your Angular controller, Angular services, Angular views. That's all. I don't have time to teach you how Angular works. Yep.
Were you on Windows? Are you a .NET guy also, or is this really?
Yeah.
My question mostly is, as someone who knows, request response frameworks, say like Rails, what is the big benefit for jumping to like a full stack JavaScript when you can just throw Angular or React or something else at the front of that API instead?
So it kind of, I think, depends. There's a number of different potential benefits. There's the one of just performance of having the evented model work with high concurrency. So like, I think it was maybe like WhatsApp or Snapchat, one of those like chat type web/mobile applications, wrote a pretty long post about that, how the level of concurrent connections they needed to support just wasn't feasible on a more traditional web server model, and that Node being event driven and really handling high levels of concurrency well was a benefit. So the nature of your application might necessitate those or might create performance constraints that Node's approach solves. Beyond that, I think I was reading some articles about this last night, and it seems like there's a lot of debate actually about, it's like I read an article, I think it was called like the myth of full stack. The idea being like, okay, great, like everyone works on JavaScript, but like good backend developers are still good backend developers and vice versa. Like there's skills that you still need to cultivate. It's not like you can just switch immediately, but I don't exactly buy that. I mean, I buy it, but I think there's still value there. And if you're working on a large scale project that takes years, I've been working on a web project for like 2.5 years, like a big financial application. That's my day job. And we've had a significant amount of turnover in the 2.5 years, and it is pretty nice to be able to just, well, it would be nice because we're not using this, but it would be nice to be able to just say, okay, like that guy can move to the front end team, because we have 10 contractors who are .NET guys, and they're great for writing service calls, but we don't need that many service calls. We need UI, and they can't work on it. So if we were doing full stack JavaScript, well, if we were doing company in Western Mass, if we were doing full stack JavaScript, we probably couldn't hire enough talent. Because Western Mass doesn't have that much web development talent from a JavaScript side. But so if any of you are talented front-end developers and need work, I can probably get you connected to someone. But that's a side point. But anyway, the point is, I think there are definite valid benefits to using the same language in your full stack. Like I said, the isomorphic stuff doesn't apply to the specific boilerplate as well. I can, super quick, I'm not going to demo it, but I do have, this is my in progress Mean.js app. And I came up with some extra little minor handling. So I have in one place in my definitions vertical integrated module, I have a common folder. And so this service, and you see it's kind of done in kind of a gross way, where it's like, if this is Angular, we register it as an Angular service. Otherwise, we like export it as a Node module, which is kind of ugly, but at the same time, like, it's nice to be able to, I mean, again, this is one function in the whole thing, so it's not the best example, but it's nice to have this. Oh yeah, and so there's a little more Angular handling here, where basically we're just, you know, if it's Node, exports exist and is the normal exports object. If it's Angular, we just kind of fake it out and then register it. But, you know, it's nice to not have to duplicate this logic and worry about maintaining this logic across both the client and the server. And I could totally see plenty of valid use cases for that. One example, you know, again, on our current project, we have pretty involved client-side financial calculations, you know, complex business logic. And over time, we've kind of decided it would be really nice to move that to the server or have it available on the server too, because we get in these weird cases where, like, you have to, there's these specific, we're porting a legacy thing. So we have these cases where you have to load all the data from a customer across, you know, all these different screens into the new app, because loading it fires the calculations, and then you save that, and then you don't even use it. Like, that could all happen on the server. It would make way more sense, but it would be a huge pain in the ass to port, like, the core of our business logic from one language to another. And if we were doing full stack JavaScript, it's just literally a non-issue. I mean, you have to put in some effort to make sure you're not using APIs that are available in one and not the other, but that cost is so much less than converting giant tangles of business logic from one language to another. So I think there are definitely definitely a lot of potential benefits, but really, you know, as with any technical decision ever, it's fitting it to the project at hand. And if you know, you can turn the benefits into weaknesses and vice versa. You can kind of pervert the intention if you want, but if you have a situation that's good for it, I think there's very real benefits. Any other questions? All right, cool. Thanks, guys. Now we have to have an actual weekend.
So did you take some time off?
No.